Well, good morning, everybody. It's Don Johnston here, and this is going to be a terrific webinar, I think. It's the first, it's kind of an experiment, I think the first of what I hope will be a series of chats with experts. Not to say that lawyers aren't experts in something, but you don't necessarily want to be listening to lawyers all the time. So that's part of what we're doing here. And we've got two terrific guests, both from Echoworks Corporation, and you'll understand why that's significant in a couple of minutes. First is Sarah Happe, who is the Director of Client Engagement at Echoworks. And she must have started working when she was about 3 years old, because it says she has 18... Work with me here, Sarah. 18 years of experience in email encryption, and is recognized as a real vendor, a real expert in the field. She's also obtained patent protection for data encryption on iOS devices. And as the Director of Client Engagement at Echoworks, is a leader in digital communication that is secure. We also have Christian Peel of Echoworks. He's Vice President of Customer Engineering. Does that mean you're an engineer yourself?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep.
So, he also is deeply involved in what Echoworks does, which is secure digital communication. He works with customers just the same as Sarah does, works with customers to deliver messaging solutions that work for individual companies. And of course, they're all different. They all have different needs, and so these kinds of solutions have to be, in some senses, custom developed. So, welcome the two of you. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Don.
Just a couple of notes. Please do send in some questions if you can. We already have a few here from some of the listeners who signed up, asking some stuff. We'll try to get to those a little bit later if we can. But send them in, and we'll try to answer all of them. Even if we don't get to them during the webinar, maybe we can send answers out to the people who pose the questions. So what we'll talk about on the agenda, which you should be seeing now, is why do we need encryption? What do those funny letters mean? AES, S-MIME, asymmetric. And believe me, I've had that. What does that funny word mean? And that's really what they want to know. And the encryption use cases, critical differentiators to consider. That sounds like legal writing. Actually, lawyers wrote that because it doesn't mean anything. And then privacy regulations and email encryption. So, okay. One of the two of you answer why. The poll question. I want to get to that first. I'm sorry. If you look up on the screen, you'll see that we have a poll for listeners, and just answer this either yes to one, yes to two, yes to both. Is your primary email encryption goal to encrypt just inside the company, or two, is your primary email encryption goal to make sure that encryption happens on any confidential information that leaves your network, or is it both? Is it really to encrypt inside the company and also to encrypt what leaves? So that may require a little bit of thought. It's easy to say both, but in fact it may not be what's required. So look, should emails be protected? Should they be encrypted?
Good question.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
definitely.
go ahead.
Chris and I are going to say yes.
Yeah, of course you say yes.
So, yeah, and even that poll question, I think someone might come into a discussion assuming that they need one versus the other, and then once they're educated and learn a little more about realizing their goals and what they're trying to accomplish, it could become a lot more simple, or they may
Yeah,
they
may
may
not
end
need
up
what
with a
they think
solution
they
that they
need.
weren't expecting at the beginning.
Sure.
So that's one of the first things I talk about with a new customer that's trying to figure out their needs, and they're explaining their, whether they're approaching this from a compliance perspective or if they just know it's the right thing to do, and they're assuming that they need to encrypt everything everywhere. And so when you start peeling it back a bit and say, what really do you need to accomplish? Are you trying to make sure that when you're communicating outside of your business with customers or partners, do you need to secure that? And if you need to secure that, is it good enough to make sure it's secured as it's traveling around, or do you have further requirements? And we'll get into these slides and questions about keeping it encrypted. It's,
Well, sometimes people just don't want to read their names in the paper,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a legitimate motivation.
Email encryption is often driven, as I'm sure your audience well knows, is by regulatory requirements. It's required, like you say, by just good corporate governance, right? So we see, things like PIPEDA, HIPAA in the U.S., Sarbanes-Oxley, all those things, and now the advent of GDPR, where encryption is really kind of, if you're not doing it, you're offside, right? So that's the first question, right? You probably have compliance that drives you to do it. And the internal versus external is an interesting conversation when I am engaging with our customers in terms of a solution set. Traditionally, what's called boundaries, where everything within the organization is secured in a sense that you don't need to protect it. And it's the easiest way to implement encryption because you can do it for the entire organization as it's leaving. So boundary is a very easy implementation and can provide a very robust outbound secure communication to your customers.
So just so I understand, so you've got this sort of membrane on the outside of the organization. Information can freely be available inside, but as soon as it goes through the membrane, then it has to be protected.
Secure. When it leaves that organization, you have to be able to look at your compliance officer or the regulatory requirements and say, yes, I delivered that PII information or that customer information securely to them. The internal stuff is another layer, right? This is where the internal organization, access control rights, access to your email clients, whatever you're using there, may require that, from a business requirements, that you need to secure communications between individuals.
Sure.
This is where now you need your IT people to be, essentially unable to read that messaging. It's a higher level of security in a sense because it's a little bit more complicated. Boundary is very easy to deploy. It can be universal for any device that you're sending outbound. But internal, you raise the stakes. So the one thing you'll find in security, whether it's email encryption or other things, the more secure something becomes, the less usable it becomes. And those are trade-offs you have to understand. So when you do internal encryption, now you need to secure between maybe mergers and acquisitions or in accounting or between the C-level suite where they're communicating very sensitive information that needs to be hidden.
And don't want the network administrators to be able to read it.
We in
that's one
fact
of the
do
main
that
Yeah.
here. We have that access.
When we're approached for internal desktop encryption, it's usually our C-level executives, our legal team, our HR. They need to encrypt their emails right on the desktop, and they have a kind of very small specific use case for it instead of a wider. Our entire company should be protected and shouldn't be able to just send stuff outside of our secure network.
Yeah.
So when you deploy an endpoint encryption, you gain greater security, but you gain greater complexity on deployment. You negate certain things like journaling and archiving the messages, which is critical in terms of due diligence and being able to search, may become obfuscated because it's now stored encrypted.
You said a lot of words that I don't understand. So endpoint.
Well, yeah. As soon as you're starting to encrypt a message in your mail server, how do you also integrate that with a simple means to back up and archive your messages? Because if you need for legal discovery to fetch a message that's 3 years old that so and so sent, you need to be able to decrypt it again, and that person may not be there. You may not have easy access to their private keys. So there's a lot of extra work involved in getting that to work
that makes,
end to end.
makes sense.
And when we start explaining that, often clients realize, that might be more than we were willing to sign up for. And our actual goal is to make sure that what's what's leaving is going to be secure, and that's when
Yeah.
they often land on a boundary solution rather than something internal.
Because Boundary has the inherent benefit that if it's all about outbound communication security, it can still travel through your existing mail infrastructure. So your standard journaling, your standard ABAS will all be uninfected by it, but you can still secure it as it goes out. So what you get is that transparency in terms of your user experience is the same at the desktop for the lawyers who are communicating outbound or the internal people communicating outbound, but still the security as it leaves the organization. And really, as an organization, you have to decide where the regulatory requirements are pushing you. So the answer to the polls, for depending on your requirements, might be we see many customers where Boundary is just sufficient enough. We see other customers where both is required.
Yeah, and it's not to say that you don't. You still need to have a secure internal network. That's not what I'm arguing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be email encryption. You're going to have other ways of securing the mail server, securing data that's stored internally.
What if I said to you, we have a document management process here that says that documents have to be destroyed every so often. Is that something that then becomes more difficult with encryption, or can you can just, I guess, delete files that are encrypted?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
That's right.
That's
I wouldn't. In fact, in some ways, it's a better situation to be in because, depending on your document destruction approach, if you're destroying an encrypted document, there is still some residue on your hard drives that the file was there.
Yes.
Unless you're employing something like a NIST or a DoD, Department of Defense sort of destruction process.
Yeah,
where
you wipe it,
you stripe the drive,
Yeah.
5 times, 10 times to remove the data, right? And it's a little bit more arduous, but if the data is encrypted, it may relax your necessity to do that type of level of wipe.
Right. Huh. So,
What are all these different
I
And we're
I
trying
get
not,
this.
we're trying not to throw too many acronyms around.
Well, no, we love acronyms here in the legal business, talk about this. AES, SMIME, asymmetric.
we just sort of threw the most popular terms on there, and there's confusion because these are just buzzwords and they can be used sometimes in the wrong way.
They can be used to make money.
They can be used to scare somebody.
Yes.
Are you doing AES? And,
our tax department does that all the time. They have what they call, laughingly, seminars where they invite the other lawyers, and then they scare the living daylights out of us. And we all want to turn ourselves into the insurance company after they explain to us what it is that we probably have done wrong.
Sure.
That's going to cost somebody tax. So maybe you do something like that with this. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of these terms are all used to secure an email at the same time, different levels of security, different ways to encrypt the data versus encrypting a key. AES is an algorithm. It's how you can scramble the data to get it into a form that nobody can read. And then there's a key length associated with AES, which you'll hear sometimes is 128-bit or 256-bit. And that's just sort of how long is the scrambling.
Yeah.
And how hard would it be later to try and unscramble it or brute force it? So 256 is going to be better than 128 because it's that much more complicated to.
Well, it's more than twice as good.
Yeah,
there
you go.
Way more than twice
Typically,
as
it's
good.
an order of magnitude,
Yeah.
right?
So that's sort of an encryption using a password or something to generate that key to then scramble the data. And if you talked about like the way you'd see encryption of a Office document or a PDF, and there's a password on that file, it has been AES encrypted.
Yep.
When we talk about SMIME, that is when we're getting into PKI and you're getting into public and private keys, and that's where asymmetric
That's the
comes
asymmetric
in.
thing,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
right.
Because if you're encrypting something asymmetrically, then you are encrypting it using a key for someone else,
Yeah.
and they would be able to decrypt it because they have the private key. So this concept of exchanging keys, and you're not just encrypting it using a password. You're encrypting it for someone else, and then they have the reciprocal.
Okay.
key.
So look, you can't get away with just.
Yeah, I'm going to say, because another way to kind of look at what Sarah said, right?
Yeah.
If you type the same password to encrypt something, if the password is dog, and I pass you the document and you type dog to open it up, that's conceptually called a symmetric encryption algorithm.
Yep.
That means the same passphrase opens it, and encrypts it.
Yeah.
Asymmetric means that it's not the same passphrase, right? So that there's special math, even beyond sort of my general understanding. But what the math says is that you get two special numbers. And what happens is that I can use a public number that you provide me, a public key, and when I encrypt it, the only thing that can decrypt it is your private key. And the math just magically works. We'll just call it magic. So the magic kind of magically works, right? And so what that means in asymmetric is I can share. And so when we say asymmetric encryption, this is where we refer to things like S-MIME, PKI, or PGP, which is probably the more relevant stuff. I can share my public key with anybody in the world, and they can encrypt something for me. But I have the private key. And that means, and that's what's asymmetric, is a different key is used to encrypt it than the key that is to decrypt it. And that's the magic. And so what that lets you do, so when they created this some 30-odd years ago, it was a brilliant sort of epiphany in terms of how now we can secure everything. And you actually use this every day. When you connect to a website, HTTPS, the underlying infrastructure there is called PKI, public key infrastructure, and it's using asymmetric encryption to get a public key and encrypt the contents back and forth. It just kind of works for us seamlessly. And it can be applied both for SSL, which is a TLS, which is a transport layer security for emails. It's used for HTTPS. It's used for transactions you use within, say, if you're using Apple Wallet or Google Pay.
Sure.
It's used everywhere. It's pervasive within our infrastructure and how we do security.
And that's where those other key sizes come in that people throw around this term of 2048-bit. That's when you're actually talking about the size of the public key that would be in a certificate. And so you'll have 1024 or 2048 or 4096. Again, it's doubling every time. And that shouldn't be confused with the 256-bit AES. They're just different algorithms and different types of keys. So one isn't better just because it's a bigger number.
Now I don't know whether I was getting the brush off or whether this was a serious answer. I posed the question about public key, private key, and I said, so I understand that I can derive my public key from my private key, but I can't derive my private key from my public key, which is why I can spread the thing around. I said, can you explain it? So this person who explained it to me said, look, let's say you have a number, and the number is 15. Right? That's your public number. Everybody knows that's your number. And so they can send you something with the number 15 on it, and it's not an issue. But your private key has some relationship to 15. Is it 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5? Is it 3 times 5? Is it 5 times 3? Is it 30 minus 15? There are lots of ways of getting to 15. Only one way works. And so I think that was basically not a story about encryption, but instead a story about how information can have a meaning going in one direction and not necessarily the other.
I believe the underlying infrastructure they use this factoring, which is a kind of math, right? And the public key is a factor of the private key, and that you can essentially, you're right, you could try to re-engineer the private key. And so that's where key length becomes an important factor. If your key length is 1 bit or 2 bits or something like that, the permutations and combinations are pretty easy to do. So what we've seen in the industry, when this was first launched, key lengths were probably 512 bytes. And that was sufficient because the processing power out there was pretty insignificant. But now we see today, the power in your camera at your front door, or the power in your phone is so significant that the key lengths have to expand.
Even garage door openers.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that is that it's not changing the underlying infrastructure. PKI as a solution set hasn't changed. The math hasn't changed. But by increasing the key length, the ability to brute force or to guess that factoring has been taken from what originally maybe 512 bytes took would take weeks or months to do, now could be done in seconds. So by increasing it to 2048, we get into years or decades to brute force. So that's why we see security is always this arms race, right? You hear that often in the security thing, of us staying ahead of making sure your technology is keeping up with the change. I mean, one of the things probably in about 10 years from now we'll be talking about is quantum computers and their effect on algorithms.
Sure. Well, that's the one thing that the blockchain folks are concerned about. If you look at what they do with Bitcoin, that's double encrypted.
Yep.
Using elliptic curve.
ECLs.
Encryption, and so that would take longer than we should all live as long as it would take to break that algorithm, but a quantum computer could do it quickly, and so there have been a number of there's been a lot of thought about how to change distributed ledger systems, so that they're more resistant to quantum computing, and then so there's this whole concept of quantum-resistant algorithm.
There's a whole set of research already ongoing for the last 5 years. I remember it was RSA 3 years ago, and there's research companies in Waterloo already, ex-people from BlackBerry, is simply exploring encryption algorithms to replace the current ones. Interesting note, I was reading that AES is actually resistant to quantum computers. It won't have a benefit. But some of the encryption that we have around PGP and S-MIME, those PKI, are susceptible. So those will have to change probably in the next 10 years.
I think what I find when I'm working with customers is that the algorithms are kind of a given. It's expected that an email encryption solution would offer this this base standard of security.
Right.
And what gets more interesting is how is it used? What's the user experience? From person to person, what are they seeing? How are they interacting with it? Because the algorithms are there, very, very low level, and that's not what the people are seeing or that's not necessarily what makes it simple or complicated. That's the security underneath, and there's this whole layer on top that people need to really take a close look at of how is it used. And
speaking of layers, transport layer security. Chris mentioned this earlier. Talk about that. I mean, there are lots of firms that say, "Oh, our system for sending email is strong because we use transport layer security." So that's good enough, right?
Sure. Yeah, that is a great question, and it can be good enough. So we don't want to diminish TLS because it's used a lot, and even in our own solutions that we offer, TLS is one of the primary use cases to deliver a secure email. But if it's the only option that a company has, it's not always enough, because it takes both sides, the sender and the recipient mail servers, both have to support that TLS in order for it to occur. So just because your business has a TLS certificate on their mail server, there can be recipients that can't receive that. Right. And then the mail server, if it has no other option, is just going to fall to delivering it in the clear.
So let's say it's Gmail at the other end. You're using some kind of webmail service, not to to pick on Gmail. But what happens there?
They have TLS. So depending on your goals, again, it comes back to what do you need for security? What's driving your need for security? Is it just to deliver it securely in transit? Then you can use TLS and deliver an email to Gmail. And it traveled securely over the internet, and now it's at the Google server, and it's sitting in the clear in their servers. Yeah. So is that okay? Because now it can be scanned by Google, and it's not encrypted at rest anymore. So it was just encryption in transit. And not to diminish it, that is definitely enough sometimes.
Did you read about that lawyer in England, who and I know lots of people who use webmail services. Lawyer in England was scolded by the Law Society there because his use of Gmail.
Right.
And apparently there was a data breach of some kind, the question that came up, and I don't want to debate this or anything, but the question that came up is interesting, and that is, are you doing enough,
Right.
As a lawyer? Because lawyers have this obligation to protect their clients' data. We're not supposed to use it. We're not supposed to disclose it. In fact, even if everybody knows about our client, even then we can't talk about it without the client without permission. And so, the question comes up as to, are you doing enough? And if you're not doing enough, are you somehow negligent?
Well,
Sure.
I think, that's the whole question really is, so that answer is the same, is TLS good enough, right? Because in that particular case, you're right. If, there's lots of organizations I see today who've moved to O365 to G Suite in terms of their mail clients.
Right.
But you're right, if it's just a public mailbox, what protection do you have in that context in terms of what Google is doing or not doing? We've all experienced the situation where we've searched, say, golf clubs, and the next thing you know, they're popping up golf ads everywhere, right? Or you receive an inbound message about maybe a particular product or a customer, and all of a sudden that's being scanned. So the delivery itself being secure is important. That means that no one is spying on it between the point of sending and receiving.
Right.
But if you're using a public mailbox, I think G Suite and O365 are fine, but I think if you're using just a generic box, what you have to look at, examine what the security implications are for the customer's data. But if you use transport layer, and back to Sarah's point, I think it is good enough, but it has to be in the right context. We see customers, for instance, who do TLS delivery consistently, but what they do is when they set up that TLS, they set it up to known partners. We call it kind of whitelisting, where they say, between us and this law firm, us and that law firm, TLS is an acceptable delivery channel because I know on the other end it's secure, and I know when they reply back that it can also use TLS to get back to me.
Yeah.
So now we know that that information is delivered securely. And you may even want to be able to let the recipient know that. Like you may want to be able to even brand as, hey, this was delivered over TLS. We see that happening in the public space. If you look at G Suite or Google or Yahoo, they actually start to flag now when a message has been delivered securely to give you warning that if it didn't come over TLS, it may have been may not be secured.
Authentic.
And so we see customers who do that, and then it's important when you look at a solution if the TLS isn't secure or it's an unsecure location. For instance, you may say, I'm okay with TLS everywhere, but I don't want it to Gmail. So you have to have a fallback option. So TLS, I think, does fit a purpose and is certainly more and more prevalent now. We see by far more and more organizations who have TLS. We have some customers, for instance, who operate in the opposite mode where they use TLS everywhere, but they blacklist Gmail and Yahoo, not because that they're non-secure sites.
Or
but
like the 50 or so.
Yeah, because the content there may be examined, so but they're willing to send a TLS into any sort of legal entity that they feel is
interesting.
So it really, you have to look at what your protection requirements are and what your exposure is.
Yeah, and then it leads into what is another option when you can't do TLS or you don't want to do TLS. Then what other types of encryption are okay or are available to deliver?
You posed the question. Why don't you answer it?
So yeah, we've already thrown out terms like SMIME, and that does require the recipient to also have a key. So there are businesses that will publish their SMIME keys, or an enterprise that has deployed PGP everywhere, and they're making those PGP keys available on the internet so that other businesses can send into them using that.
Yeah, just
so that's
for
great
those out there who don't, PGP, pretty good privacy.
Just another sort of PKI-based system, just using different algorithms than SMIME, but the use cases around PGP and SMIME are very similar.
Right.
But that's great for big enterprises that have gone to that trouble. The majority of email delivery is not going to go to a business that has PGP keys. It's going to go to somebody that has no concept of encryption at all, and you need some secure delivery to them as well. So that you'll find popular, I can call them sort of default delivery methods that could work to everyone. Could be asking that recipient to come up to a secure website and read their message in a portal. So you haven't actually delivered it to them, but you've sent them a notification saying there's something secure waiting for you. Please come up here and
Oh, so
sign in
they
and
take
read
a
it.
peek at the
So
server.
They get to
instead-
they get to come up to the secure site and read it. So
It's sort of like an encrypted Gmail.
an encrypted
all right.
webmail
Okay.
that you're offering them to come up and create an account to have a mailbox and view their secure mail.
So they don't need any infrastructure
Then they don't need
themselves.
anything at all because they're coming at it through a browser. So then they can do that on their mobile, their desktop, anywhere they are.
Yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous. It's sort of the easiest entry point. Like everybody will be able to access and download.
Yeah.
So this is, so if you've got bring your own device gang,
Yes.
people running around, then they're good because
Yeah.
they're not, it's not sort of arriving at their portable device.
Yeah.
They're looking at what's in a server.
Yeah. Right.
So so you have it in the server. That's the upside. It's easy. Everybody can access it. Anybody can register it. And you'll see that in the portal there's a number of variations in there where they can some options in the marketplace. They can use social connectors like Facebook or LinkedIn to log in to pick it up. They might be able to do things like the unique challenge response. There's a lot of things you can do. The downside of a portal is that it's in a portal. It's not in your inbox.
It's the
Yes,
pro
right.
and the con at the same time. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and in terms of getting a permanent copy, portal messages tend to expire. They tend to self-delete after, say, 30 days.
Well, that makes
the
sense.
client can download them, but now it's still kind of outside. So it has some upsides,
Right.
But there are some cons to that options as well.
So
Would certainly help with document destruction policy
Yep.
if it's automatic.
yeah, and auditing whether somebody has read it or not. Because if it's
Yeah.
if it's in a hosted service, then you're gonna you can have nice things like read receipts or
Yeah.
Or
or
mess-
they
or message
an
recall.
audit that they opened the attachment that was inside that message, and you wouldn't have known that otherwise if you just delivered it out directly to them.
So we have some customers in the healthcare space here in Canada, and they exclusively use Portal because they love the auditability.
Right.
They love the fact they can do recalls on it, and so that seemed to fit their security requirements.
Yeah, no HL7 because it's not, right?
Yeah.
It's not traveling anywhere.
Yeah.
But the other big shift in a default delivery, a way to deliver secure information to anyone is to push it out. And there's a few different ways to deliver an encrypted message to someone who doesn't have keys. One option is, for example, a secure PDF, where that PDF document has been encrypted with a password. Maybe that password came from the recipient. They went through a registration process and set up an account, and now secured documents can be delivered to them using that
That sounds pretty
password.
good.
Or the sender maybe is going to set a password at the time of sending. Could be their account number, or it could be their postal code, or some shared secret. If you're actually speaking to the person you're going to send that email to, a call center environment or something, then you can agree on a shared passphrase, and now the sender could just send out a secure PDF
Right.
using that. There's other technologies to push out encrypted content. It could be, you've pushed out this encrypted blob, and then they come to a web page to almost decrypt it. So like the keys in a server, but the content has been pushed to you, and that's a popular way we see some encryption. Email
Platforms,
encryption platforms offering that kind of push
So you
style
fetch the key.
delivery.
Yeah.
So that but in that case, you're only reading it if you're online, right? You've got
Right.
this encrypted blob in your mailbox, but you can't do anything with it unless you connect to the
Right.
encryption service online.
Yeah.
The PDF is nice because it's going to just be there. You could save it to your local computer, be on an airplane, and you're still able to open up
Yeah,
that
read it.
that document
Yeah,
with a
offline
PDF
access.
viewer. Everyone has a PDF viewer. Everyone knows how to
Yeah.
open a PDF. So.
We see even in that space too. We have a customer in the Scottish banking arena, and they actually do attachment encryption, where they're not even encrypting the message, but the
attachment
forms
as well, yeah.
are being encrypted directly. So the client is just simply receiving either office documents or PDFs, and they're the only things being encrypted. So sometimes it's not so much the message; it's the attachments that need to be encrypted. So sometimes you want to look for a solution that has some variables in there, right, where the content itself is the message isn't important, but the message there, and then you can encrypt what's necessary. But again, these are just different options. And of course, in any of these options, you also need to be able to provide a secure reply, right? You need to allow your customers to send messages back. So, and typically that, interesting enough, is accomplished through, if you're doing gateway type stuff, it's accomplished through a TLS inbound connection.
Gateway?
Gateway meaning boundary, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
So-
right,
So
right.
if you're just doing boundary, right, the responses are typically facilitated through a portal, so whether it's PDF or portal, the replies come back through the portal, and the portal delivers it over TLS. And so the interesting thing, or the benefit of sort of boundary-based encryption, is that the internal user really has no software to be deployed.
Yeah.
So that's the
And
upside.
they can
all
just
there in the
stay
clear,
working
yeah.
in Outlook and
Right.
not really disrupt being productive.
Okay. So actually, this is an interesting question that should you let an employee choose when or when not to encrypt, or do you have instead rules that, depending on the content that is being sent, the rule will automatically encrypt whatever is being sent? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think usually a company's going to say, "Well, I want both," and I would hope that they want both, because if you can empower your employees to make a good decision, that's great, right? Teach them, hey, are you sending out a document that is sensitive for any number of reasons?
Sure.
Then here's how you can encrypt that, and give them a facility, give them a button in their Outlook to flag it for encryption, or give them a keyword that they
Subject
know
tag,
a keyword that they know to type in the subject, and that empowers them to make a good decision. But if that's all you do, then you better really educate your employees well, because they could make a mistake, or they just might forget. So at the same time, if you have a platform that can let you define some policies to watch things that are leaving, then you're going to really protect things from both angles. So look for credit cards in a message, or look for certain attachments, and make sure those are forced to be encrypted on the way out.
Typical strategy usually is to have some DLP engine deployed.
Sorry, what engine?
A DLP, data leakage protection.
Oh, yes, okay.
Which is really looking for that kind of stuff, right? And strong DLP engines will have things out of the box, like rule sets like PIPEDA or HIPAA or PCI, those kind of things help you sort of jumpstart. And the DLP engine will do the work. Typically, they're used for classifications and marginalizing data that needs to be reviewed. But you can also use it to flag and route stuff to be encrypted.
Is that keyword-based or
Usually it can be multifaceted.
source-based?
In terms of...
It can be
sort of-
pattern-based.
Where it comes from.
Oh, yeah. Typically, it'll be pattern-based. Typically, you're right. There'll be a lot of what we call regular expressions or pattern-based searching. Usually they're multifaceted, like it might be if the message is leaving the company and it has an attachment, and inside that attachment I see, credit card information or SIN number or account number. There'd be some customization, obviously, because each organization has its own customizations. But we do see, I've seen both where organizations really educate their users, because in some ways, if you look at security practices, the weakest security problem or the biggest security problem facing any organization is the employee. It doesn't matter what systems you put up, the employees are more likely, if they're better educated they are, the better off your organization is.
Yeah.
I worked with one large insurance company in the UK, and they basically train their employees to hit the button or type a secure word. But interesting enough, we were working on a project where we were implementing DLP, and we were flagging every message that wasn't encrypted that should have been encrypted, and then producing reports to find those users, not to punish them, but to go back and say, okay, you sent these things out, you should have encrypted it, just to make them aware of it. So it was really reinforcing. So the DLP was there to help educate and catch, as Sarah was saying, oops kind of situations, right?
Right.
I've even seen some organizations take a very hard stance where it says everything outbound is encrypted. And so that's another posture I've seen
pretty
organizations.
extreme.
It is extreme, but we have seen that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Typically, when they do that, they'll employ a TLS first and fall back.
Right, yeah.
Right, to minimize sort of user experience.
Well, because of the time remaining, I'd like to skip ahead a bit and to talk about what, the GDPR and
Sure.
a little bit
Yeah.
about
This question about
what-
policies, you almost kind of
Yeah.
answered, of talking about, we see people looking for sensitive information, account numbers, credit cards. That's kind of policies that would be defined, depending on the line of business.
Right, and you'd have some business logic that would enable you to recognize that on the way out.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this already.
Yeah. So, I think it's slide
Yep.
9,
So
something like
important
that.
differentiators to consider. We've sort of talked about that as well. It's about the use cases, the availability of different options. How simple is it to use? It's not just about the algorithms. It's about enabling people to use it and still work and be productive.
Okay, so this is I get a lot of questions about the GDPR, and just for those who don't know what that stands for, it's the General Data Protection Regulation that was put in force in May 25th, in the European Union. And lest you think that that's not important, because last time I checked, we're not in Europe, you have to think again, because in fact the GDPR essentially protects all personal information, or as they call it, personal data, pertaining to persons living in Europe. And there's some confusing stuff about citizenship and so forth, but basically what it means is that if you're handling personal information that's being exported from Europe, then you have to be compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, and if you're not, there are repercussions, legal repercussions for you and for the people who are sending that information to you.
Significant financial fines as well are really associated.
Oh, they're massive. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tens and tens of
And it's
millions of
very true.
euros.
GDPR, we see GDPR coming up with all our customers. I was in conversations with some clients down in Brazil, and they're concerned about GDPR.
Sure.
Mexico, as well as the States, because you're right, the moment your business somehow touches anybody within the European community, it comes in there. I've actually heard that even California is looking at adopting GDPR as a template in terms of their data protection as well. So it's certainly caught a hold, and it's certainly very, very impactful in terms of how we look at data or customer data. I know we've had to make significant adjustments. We were getting ready for this over the last couple of years. I mean, some aspects of GDPR are about transparency, right?
Yeah.
The ability
What you say.
ability to disclose to your customers what information you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The right for them to request that information. The right to have that information destroyed. We worked
So
with
it wasn't about the algorithms or anything that
No,
needed to
no.
change, right? The
Yeah.
encryption stays the same, but it's just making sure that
Yeah.
there's transparency, that it's made available, what we're storing, how we're storing it.
Yeah, and can you enable, does the system that you put in place enable you to be compliant
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
with requests?
Yeah, exactly.
Inquiries, requests, rights of erasure, that kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
We worked with one of the major banks in the UK, Sainsbury, that where they were using our encryption platform to essentially deliver that information, like a customer's request to close account and disclose the information captured. They had to communicate that to the customer,
Yes.
where they were no longer a customer.
Oops.
And so, but they had to find that. So encryption became a key for them in terms of being able to deliver it. Now, GDPR itself doesn't explicitly, it has a lot of verbiage and doesn't explicitly say you have to encrypt. But the only way you can safely deliver some information is to secure it. It also says things like, if you do encrypt things and it is compromised, you don't have to disclose that because you've protected it before it was stolen. So there's a lot of nuances in terms of its interpretation. It's still, I think, everybody's still trying to get grips with it in terms of understanding how it works and what they need to do to be compliant. There's no certification per se.
No.
Right?
In fact, you could almost argue that there's no compliance. It's not a compliance regime. It's a philosophy that has certain concepts and principles associated with it.
Yeah.
I mean, even for example, being responsible for data. If you're a data controller, or you're somebody who's working for a data controller, a processor of some kind, you're clothed with the same kind of obligations. The GDPR says, if you're responsible, here are the things that you must do. Well, you have to figure out how to do them.
Yep.
They're not telling you how to do anything.
Yep.
They're just saying this is the result that you should have. And if you don't, here are our prosecutors. France, take it away, and then they sue you, and you end up
Yeah.
paying millions of euros.
Yeah, and you're literally, you could be arguing even in that process like that you were doing the right thing, but the interpretation is so open. I suspect when we see the first sort of, I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think there's been any
No, I don't know
any specific legal action taken at this point. That was one of the questions I think that was questioned, whether or not we've heard of any kind of on any kind of breach and stuff like that, but to me, I don't think there has been. But it'll be interesting when the first one does get tabled, because I think that'll be first point of argument is like we were doing everything properly, but it doesn't clearly tell us what we have to
That's
do.
right.
Unlike PCI or PCI for private credit cards. Or SOC 2, which is a IT kind of thing, how to run an operational center. Those have very explicit details on how to run and what to be audited. But under GDPR, it's kind of interpretive at this point.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't actually know this or pay attention to it, but even Canada's Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act has some sort of imposed requirements for certain things that in fact people don't pay attention to, because there are other ways of accomplishing the compliance with all the privacy principles. We see that when governments impose particular technologies, a lot of times they just they find that they get outdated pretty quickly.
Yeah. There was one neat question that came in about GDPR. I'm just seeing it here in the list that, is encrypted data still personal data?
That's a great question.
That is a good question, and I would say yes, it is. It's good that it's been stored securely, and it is encrypted, but it's still somebody's personal data there, and if they want it deleted or they want access to it, then you still need to be able to do that.
You still have to disclose.
To identify that particular piece of encrypted data and remove it.
Yeah, that's a relentlessly sensible concept. If you think of encryption as putting something in a locked safe or a vault,
yes,
it's whatever it is that is in that vault is still the thing that you've put in. And so encrypted personal information is still personal information. How could it be argued otherwise? But I think people do argue otherwise.
But we're sort of in that sort of sea change now, where people are becoming more and more aware of their personal information and the protection of that. GDPR is just the advent. So one of the questions is, how do we see this changing? I think discussions around content and data and my personal information are going to become more and more prevalent, certainly in the West, because with things like the incident with Facebook and the election down south, and the use of that information is so powerful, and so the protection and the validity of the value of that information needs to be recognized, and the individual's rights need to be observed. And we see this constant sort of struggle right now between. I was talking to somebody last night. I mean, you give up so much when you click accept terms and conditions for these quote-unquote free services, but you are basically allowing them to use your data. If it's autonomized, okay, it's scrubbed, that's one thing, but if you're working with an institution like a bank or a law firm, then you have an obligatory right to protect that. And I think that we're going to see more and more legislation in this area. So I think that GDPR is just the beginning or the evolution of sort of what we've had before, and it's going to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those kinds of regulations are definitely here to stay, and they will stay here until there's, our robot overlords eventually defeat us, and and they're running the show.
Yeah. The next question is an interesting one we got in here as well. How can smaller organizations stay afloat while maintaining compliance and open with their clients and contacts? Cost can be astronomical and ensure that everything is on site.
Well, is that second sentence really true? Costs can be astronomical?
Well, astronomical, certainly heavy. And it's funny, I actually had this exact conversation with our auditors yesterday. We're going through a PCI audit right now. And he was discussing sort of how PCI audits have changed in the last 5 to 10 years. He did one. He was telling me he did an audit 5 years ago, you know, it was like 40, 50 pages. And the template now to start a PCI audit starts at 150 pages.
Yeah.
We're at over 250 pages, and we're still going through our audit process now. And so with the advent of things like GDPR, and so we see this as well, and PCI compliance, and you know, we put SOC 2, and then we've got other technical audits where Web Trust audited for root certificates. We're already in 5 or 6 audit paths already. There is some overlap, but it is you're right. It's heavy lifting, and we were talking exactly the same thing. I'm not sure how the future looks for smaller organizations, startups, smaller firms, for instance, where they are dealing with a lot of customer information.
Can you outsource it?
Well,
I mean, it must be.
And in the past, we had a customer approach us saying, we're trying to minimize our PCI audit. We don't want our local mail server to be in scope at all.
Right.
So if somebody emails us something sensitive right now, we just bounce it back and say, we can't receive this because we don't want to store it, because then we would have to encrypt it. So it was making it very difficult for them to work, and they came to us for this concept of inbound encryption, which is something we haven't even really talked about here yet. But
why don't you talk about it then?
But yeah, to use a hosted service instead of doing it all on premises, then you know, those inbound emails could be stored securely at, you know, we've talked about a portal, and then the employees could go and read it there, and now they've been able to keep their own email environment out of scope by using a different service that can let them view these secure emails in a PCI certified environment that they didn't have to do themselves.
So is that what Echoworks does?
It's one of
the solution sets we provide. So certainly, I think that'll sort of be what will happen where personal information is sensitive. Outsourced providers or outsourced solution sets where that's part of the solution. It'll be the vendor's responsibility to have that compliance. And so that's the same thing. So if you sign any vendor up, you'll need to look at their compliance, like are they SOC 2, are they PCI, are they GDPR? I know we do, every contract we do with any major firm, that those are all security questions that we have to go through.
Oh, sure.
And meet. So I think that the way to minimize that cost, to stay, quote unquote, on side, would be to look at, you know, how can I do this through a third party who has all that compliance there? That might be the best way, I think, in the future, where we're going to see more and more of that happening.
Yeah. I know that the GDPR, you know, mandates what they call data impact assessments, or data protection impact assessments. We would call them privacy impact assessments here. And more and more companies are engaging in getting even privacy impact assessments done, and those are the kinds of investigations that can raise and flag the issues that you might have with data flows, who's seeing it, who's handling it, where are the risks, and because one of the questions here is, you know, it about the costs. If you have a data breach, the costs of dealing with that can be absolutely immense and dwarf the costs of compliance. It just has to happen once.
Yeah, and you need to disclose when you have a breach as well.
Well, now you have to. Yeah, that's right.
And so you can't just hide and sweep it under the rug. So yeah, and so it's always this budgetary issue sometimes. It's really never too late to deploy an encryption solution, because you're right. If you don't deploy it, what's the cost of not deploying it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it can be too late to deploy a solution if you just had your data breach.
True. It's like shutting the door after the or the barn door after the horses take
Well, that's
off.
right. I mean,
I guess, but of course it's not too late.
You know, the business I'm in, people don't phone me up and say, Don, I've got this fabulous, great news to share with you. Everything is going well. Send me a bill. It doesn't happen like so. My worldview is of necessity one that probably has more negativity built into it than somebody else's.
Yeah, we see that. I mean, often we see I've seen them in the last couple of months. Customers either have come to us because information was being shared inappropriately, and through an audit, they've realized that they're quote unquote offside, and they're in significant trouble. So there's an immediacy then.
Yep.
Right, and then there are other customers who have more of a process-driven sort of review and say, hey, this is something we need to address,
Yeah.
or that we need to find a better usable solution set to get to our customers. So, like, we can't expect them to communicate in, like, for instance, we work with a Scottish bank. They were still using mail, like physical mail post.
Sure.
And it was taking them, and this is one of our use cases, was taking them, 8 weeks to 3 months to get them to sign up for a new account, and it was just unacceptable. Right. But by moving to the new digital sort of age, but how do you secure that? They were able to use encryption, deliver that process, and take it from 8 to 10 weeks down to 3 to 5 days.
Right.
No, that's
Right.
good.
So there's process improvement to be found.
Yep.
There's immediacy in communication, and the key is usability. Right. Whatever solution set you take has to work for your client base. Has to be there.
Yeah, I remember a customer that was using zip software, password protecting the zips, and then emailing those to their client or customer partner, and then they had to talk on the phone and agree on the password for this zip, and then then you've got these files all over the place, and you've got to download them out of your email, and when they came to us and realized that the platform could manage all of that transparently and let people just register their own passwords, and you don't have to talk to anybody, and they
So everybody could just
They were thrilled.
relax more, drink more coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Nothing wrong with that. Well, we've got maybe a couple of minutes left, so I thought I'd give the floor to you to just share any closing thoughts that you have. If you want to have a 30-second commercial for Echoworks, that's fine too. You can talk a little bit about Echoworks.
Well, I think it's kind of just been clear throughout that we are focused on securing communications and offering lots of different use cases so that no matter who's coming to us from what space, we've heard it before, and we can help them choose the right methods of delivery and help them craft policies to make sure that the right stuff is getting encrypted and that it's easy for everybody. So that's what we strive for all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, just to be a bit of an advertisement, right? So we've been in the business for about 15 years, encrypting messaging, and that's all we really do. So we're really focused on that. And one of the things that our platform, there's two main things that distinguish our platform from our competitors. One is the flexibility in its use cases. So we're not just, SMIME or PGP. We're not just symmetric versus asymmetric encryption. We support, sort of half a dozen flavors of how Portal could work. We have direct encryption. We have PGP. So the platform is extensible even once you deploy. So if you choose Portal, but all of a sudden you need to do an SMIME or PGP to a particular customer, we can do that all on the same platform. But that's a very techie thing to say, but really where we win is on usability. The user experience and the brandability and the flow is how we win our customers. So if we can get into a presentation and you're looking at solutions, encryption is encryption. You can buy encryption from just about any vendor. Often it's an add-on to their current platform, and it does the job, absolutely. But it's the user experience, it's the usability, and it's the flexibility of the platform is where we excel at. So if that's something you're looking at, give us a call. We're happy to talk to you about it as well.
And when our customers are using our platform and sending information out, it looks like it's coming from them.
Oh, it's
it
a white label
Echoworks
thing.
all over it,
It's 100%
and that's
white label.
and so you're getting a secure email from your bank, and that's the relationship you have with the platform, not a third party. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very grateful that the two of you could come in, Sarah Happe and Christian Peel. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I even understood what you were saying, which is, now I graduated in the bottom half of my law school, so maybe even the bottom half of the bottom half, I don't know. But thanks so much. And if anyone out there who liked this, if you think we should go ahead and do more of these, please let us know. Thanks a lot. Good night.